Lisa crossed the last 5 meters before finding herself in front of the bank building. It looked monumental, with a modern finish mixed with elaborate moldings. Additionally, majestic columns towered in front of the entrance, resembling giants. Taking a deep breath, Lisa climbed the steps and entered the luxurious and beautifully furnished interior. It's worth mentioning that she looked somewhat impoverished, not quite like a homeless person, but not stylish either. A young security guard named Maxim immediately noticed her. He stood near the cashier, caught a glimpse of the girl's appearance from the corner of his eye, and thought she had simply mistaken the door. But his surprise knew no bounds when Lisa approached him. "Excuse me, but how do I access the bank vault?" she asked, sounding as if she were an important affluent customer. Frowning, Maxim cast another glance at her, and even doubted whether a poorly dressed girl like her could have anything stored in a safety deposit box. However, his assumptions were unlikely to be relevant, and the security guard had no choice. "How do I take her to the manager?" Eugene Borisovich was a stern man, at times showing glimpses of greed and a passion for gambling, which prevailed in his character. Moreover, he often behaved unseemly, making many people dislike him. But at the same time, the management valued him because Eugene Borisovich impeccably performed his job. At least, that's how he presented himself. Furthermore, he agreed to carry out tasks that made other employees' blood run cold. He visited addresses and collected debts from defaulting borrowers, employing his own cunning methods. Hence the attitude towards him and the team, although it never went beyond dissatisfied looks. Maxim brought Lisa to him and cautiously said, "Here she is, resembling you, Eugene Borisovich. What do you need?" The manager replied with a hint of mocking in his voice. "Well, I've never seen you among our bank's clients before. I would like to gain access to one of the safe deposit boxes," Lisa answered uncertainly. "Strange, but for some reason, I've never seen you before," Eugene Borisovich said again. "I have the key, it's box number 12, Lisa replied, this time with more composure. Raising an eyebrow, the manager was surprised that a beggar-like girl, whose appearance was far from impressive when compared to other visitors, had come to check a bank vault. "Well, let's go," he gestured, inviting her into a specially secured room. They went through several security systems, and then Eugene Borisovich checked the box numbering and was slightly taken aback. Oh well, what an old box. No one had approached it for many years. Judging by his tone, the manager had never looked the true owner of this inheritance from Lisa's mother in the eyes. "Here's my key," Lisa added. "Just wonderful," Eugene Borisovich replied. Indeed, the box had been rented a long time ago, and the manager was unaware of it. He had arrived later, starting as a simple security guard and then rising to his current position. He helped open the box, even though he was not supposed to be present. However, Eugene Borisovich disregarded these rules and stayed. Lisa cautiously opened the contents. Inside was an intricately carved jewelry box. Such chests usually held sentimental items and even precious gemstones. The manager was consumed with curiosity and ignored all the prohibitions in the bank on this matter. He approached closely, almost knocking Lisa over. "Oops, sorry, I'm a bit clumsy," Eugene Borisovich said, feigning innocence. "It's fine, I'm almost finished," Lisa nodded and opened the jewelry box. Inside lay golden treasures, earrings, rings, bracelets, necklaces, and pendants. Lisa turned out to be the owner of a true treasure. The sight of such wealth nearly dropped Eugene Borisovich's jaw. He barely restrained himself from whistling. Meanwhile, Maxim, who was waiting outside, saw nothing, so he had no idea what surprised the manager. He diligently performed his duties without meddling in other people's affairs. At the same time, it was unclear where Lisa's mother could have obtained such wealth. Maria Sergeyevna had worked as a cleaner her whole life, and she and her daughter barely made ends meet. Sometimes they couldn't afford basic necessities, let alone anything more expensive. At the bottom of the jewelry box, there was also a note, but Lisa decided to read it at home so as not to take up the bank employee's time. The manager's astonishment knew no bounds, and thoughts raced through his mind at lightning speed. And this beggar, such a meek one, he thought, but Lisa herself had no idea what awaited her in that bank vault. She was just as surprised as Eugene Borisovich. "I think I'll leave," with a tremor in my voice, Lisa said. "Yes, of course," the manager nodded. At the same time, a cunning plan took shape in his mind. "By the way, let me assign you a guard,"
It's not
he
safe
suggested.
to wander around the city alone with such wealth.
"My man will escort you right to your apartment." "It's a bit inconvenient," Lisa replied. "I could walk there myself." Lisa tried to refuse, but Eugene Borisovich was a persistent man. "This service won't cost you anything, but it will protect your belongings," he persuaded her. Lisa agreed, as there were indeed so many precious items in the box that it was scary to even think about what to do with them. With her approval, Eugene Borisovich led Lisa out of the vault and immediately called Maxim. "You need to escort this young lady home," the manager whispered in his ear, "and make sure to remember the address. Better yet, write it down so you don't forget by accident." "Why do we need to do that?" Maxim furrowed his brow. "She turned out to be a VIP client of the bank, and we are responsible for her safety and comfort." Eugene Borisovich lied. "Got it, boss. I'll take care of it," Maxim nodded. The security guard was not accustomed to discussing orders. He had recently returned from the army and still respected rank. Eugene Borisovich was someone like a commander to him, and it went without saying that his orders should not be questioned, only carried out. Moreover, it was not difficult for Maxim to accompany the girl to her home. And here was a chance to change the scenery and take a walk during work for a couple of hours. Lisa was the first to leave the bank, while Maxim took another 5 minutes, presumably receiving additional instructions from the manager. Descending the steps, the guard looked around first, and then said, "Now we can walk calmly." What he saw there remained a mystery until they walked. They struck up a conversation, and it turned out that Lisa was an interesting conversationalist and a very charming girl. Maxim felt like he was in a scientific library when he was next to her. In turn, he shared with the girl how he ended up in this bank and started working as a security guard, recalling his past from a distance, so to speak, reminiscing about his past. It seemed to be not just a pressing topic for him, but also the most important problem he had overcome. Maxim was born and raised in a village where he lived in a spacious house with his parents. He studied average, not being an honor student, but not a poor student either. His grades satisfied his mother and father, who believed that the knowledge taught in the local school would be sufficient for work in the village. Max had long dreamed of something more, of escaping from the village and moving to the city. He had a girlfriend named Polina, and they had been together since their school days, dreaming of starting a family. But Polina turned out to be deceitful and unreliable. After seeing Maxim off to the army, she immediately found another guy. At that time, a chance encounter happened in the village disco. Polina captivated a wealthy man with her beauty and mannerisms, and he offered her to live together, eventually marrying her. Maxim, upon learning this, almost did something irreparable to himself. However, thanks to his commander and his experience in the army, he managed to pull himself together. Towards the end of his service, one of his former comrades offered him a job as a security guard in a bank through connections. Maxim agreed, especially since he also wanted to move to the city. Eugene Borisovich appreciated Maxim's service in the army and immediately hired him. The young man delved into the essence of the work and showed excellent results, which resulted in his salary increasing. Finally, they arrived at Lisa's home, and she, after listening to his story, said somewhat sadly, "Of course, but you did well. You managed. I've always been drawn to guys like you." Lisa's words stirred up a storm of emotions in Maxim's heart, and the thought flashed through his mind, what if I ask her out on a date? However, he was a bit shy and hesitated to take the first step. Meanwhile, the security guard also attracted Lisa's sympathy. She saw a kind and honest guy in Maxim and wanted to show her gratitude by inviting him for tea. "I bought waffles this morning before going to the bank. Maybe you'd like to come over for tea? I won't refuse. Besides, I always skip lunch anyway." Maxim nodded, and they entered the entrance together. They took the elevator to the 7th floor. Lisa opened the door to the apartment and let Maxim in first. In the spacious hallway, there was a built-in wardrobe along the wall, 2 ottomans, and a large mirror. A little further away was a handmade wooden coat rack. Taking off his outerwear, Maxim went to the bathroom, while Lisa managed to boil the kettle and prepare a bowl of chocolate waffles. Peeking into the kitchen, the young man shook his head and said, "You've made it cozy here, doing your best." Lisa answered shyly, "You have a seat. You still have time to steep the tea." Maxim pulled a chair up to the table and took the tea mug in his hands. Such a delightful aroma wafted from it that it tickled his nostrils, noticing how she inhaled the scent. Unable to resist, Lisa boasted, "I'm a big tea enthusiast. I only buy from specialty shops. Of course, it's not cheap, but it's worth it for the enjoyment." "To be honest, you surprised me," Maxim shook his head. "I didn't expect such interests from a simple girl like you." "You're making me blush." Lisa waved her hand. "Yes, I'm just an ordinary person, but with my own quirks in my head." "Tell me something about yourself," Maxim suggested. "Where were you born? What do you do?" "All right, fine," Lisa agreed, taking a sip of tea from her mug. Well, her fate turned out to be no better than the security guards. Lisa grew up in a small provincial town and had always dreamt of escaping to a big metropolis. However, for a while, it remained an elusive dream. She lived with her mother, barely making ends meet on her mother's salary. Money was always tight, and it reflected in almost everything: clothing, food, and the number of friends Lisa had. There weren't many, mostly those who also grew up in less affluent families. Their shared problems and dreams brought them closer together, but the province couldn't fulfill them. They needed to move forward and realize their potential. Lisa had envisioned her life in the big city countless times. Often, she would dream of a luxurious house, a long terrace, a blooming garden, and a respectable position in society, only for it to vanish as soon as she woke up. Her father? She never knew if he even existed. Her mother didn't like talking about it and always found ways to avoid the topic. It seemed to bring pain to her heart. Maria Sergeyevna never showed Lisa any photographs of her father or disclosed any important information. Lisa concluded that her mother simply didn't want to remember him, and she stopped bothering her with uncomfortable questions. In school, Lisa excelled academically. She consistently ranked near the top of her class, and teachers prepared her in advance for university admission. After successfully passing her exams and competing for high scores, she became a university student. The dreams of the big city became clearer and more attainable, hovering on the horizon. It felt like there wasn't much left to reach out and touch them, and her entire life could be just as she had imagined. Lisa even devised a plan for conquering the metropolis, but she had to set it aside when her mother fell seriously ill. Maria Sergeyevna sought medical help for her persistent headaches and fluctuating blood pressure. Doctors conducted tests and soon discovered an incurable illness. Lisa had to switch to distance learning to be by her mother's side. She personally monitored her mother's treatment and its effects. During a conversation with the doctor, Lisa asked directly, "What should we expect, Viktor Ivanovich?" The doctor shrugged and replied, "I can't say for certain, Lisa, but we're doing everything in our power." Tearfully, Lisa asked, "Are there no good medications?" The doctor sighed and said, "Oh, my dear, if only it were that simple, people would never die from diseases." He patted her head gently. The doctors indeed did everything they could, but they weren't magicians. Despite the timely treatment, Maria Sergeyevna's condition worsened with each passing day. She increasingly lost consciousness and sometimes failed to recognize those around her. Lisa took care of her mother while also realizing how poorly she herself was feeling. Soon, all hopes that the treatment would help faded away. One day, when Lisa brought chicken broth to her mother, she beckoned her closer and whispered softly, "I've made many mistakes in this life, but you shouldn't pay for them." Puzzled, Lisa asked, "About what, Mom?" Leaning closer. "Don't interrupt. It's hard for me to speak," Maria Sergeyevna continued. "You have a long journey ahead, but I know you'll overcome it. And my gift will help you along the way." After that, her mother fell silent, as if she ran out of words. Lisa waited, hoping to hear what the gift was, but her mother stared at the ceiling and remained silent, as if her voice had been extinguished. That day, Lisa didn't hear anything more from her. When there was an opportunity to consult with the doctor, she cautiously asked what it could mean. "Viktor Ivanovich, she was probably delusional," the doctor replied, shrugging. "But she spoke clearly, without any mistakes, and was resolute," Lisa said. "Well, sometimes there are moments of clarity, followed by a relapse into unconsciousness," the doctor explained. He was right, because after that day, Lisa never had another proper conversation with her mother. She didn't recognize her, she only nodded her head and occasionally
There was
fell
nothing
into
they could do
melancholy.
about it,
And the medical staff refrained from unnecessary interventions. It seemed they had resigned themselves to the fact that Maria Sergeyevna was on her final breath. They simply didn't rush to inform her daughter. Maria Sergeyevna deteriorated before Lisa's eyes. Her features sharpened, revealing prominent cheekbones and a narrow chin. Slowly but surely, Lisa's mother lost her beauty and transformed into an old woman. Despite the doctor's ongoing efforts to save her life, it proved futile. Intensive therapy with suitable medications, unfortunately, didn't yield the desired outcome. Maria Sergeyevna didn't survive for more than 3 days after her birthday. Lisa struggled to cope with the loss, and her close friends and acquaintances supported her and helped organize the funeral for her mother. During all this time, Lisa was in a daze and refused to believe that her mother was gone. It wasn't until a couple of weeks later that Lisa's state started to normalize, and she began to come back to reality. Now she had to continue living and address pressing matters. First and foremost, she needed to sort out her finances. She was still studying and had 1 more year left to complete her degree, and Lisa had no intention of dropping out. With great difficulty, she managed to find a part-time job, albeit for very little pay, but it was some money nonetheless. 2 weeks later, a notary contacted her and informed her that her mother had left a will. Lisa couldn't believe that her mother had prepared it in advance. At the same time, it was unclear what her mother had included in the will. The notary provided the answer by giving Lisa the number of a safety deposit box and the key. However, he didn't reveal what awaited her inside, claiming ignorance. The notary clearly knew the contents of the box and had simply carried out Maria Sergeyevna's wishes, surprising Lisa in the process. Lisa was on the edge with anticipation but restrained herself because she felt awkward in front of the notary. Nevertheless, the mysterious surprise came at just the right time since Lisa stood at a crossroads and urgently needed to make decisions. Her mother's will promised certain prospects. However, at that moment, Lisa had no idea how far-reaching they could be. It turned out that what Lisa discovered in the safety deposit box completely changed her perception of her mother. It seemed that she didn't know her well, only to the extent that Maria Sergeyevna allowed. From this, it followed that her mother had been hiding something all this time. "That's my life story in a nutshell," Lisa concluded, shrugging her shoulders. "As you can see, not much to it, no significant events, just like I never had any," Maxim replied. "Except for failed relationships, but I don't want to dwell on them anymore. They still hurt my soul, but I won't blame her, and I won't blame myself either. Betrayal, but betrayal happens everywhere." I agree. I'm sure you'll find a good girlfriend someday. Lisa sympathized, pouring him some more tea. That's enough, thank you. I need to run now. Maxim declined the offer. After saying goodbye to Lisa, he left her apartment. Evgeny Borisovich greeted him with a displeased expression. What took you so long? But you said yourself that she's our VIP client, and her safety is important to us. Maxim tried to explain to his boss. Yes, you're right. I noted down the address as I asked you, he said, handing Maxim a piece of paper with the specified address. The boss absent-mindedly rubbed his hands and stared thoughtfully at one spot. Maxim couldn't help but feel something was off with Evgeny Borisovich. Are you okay? He asked. Yes, everything's fine. You can go, the boss nodded, shifting his gaze away from that spot. By the way, you deserve praise for this, and you'll likely receive a bonus at the end of the month. Really? For what? Maxim asked in surprise. Well, how about that? You made a wealthy client feel secure, his boss replied with irony and a sly smile. I only escorted her home, Maxim stated. You see, Maximka, it's from such small services that a true security guard's job is built. I started in your position, doing everything I could to help the management, and now I'm the boss myself. Yes, you can't argue with that. Maxim nodded in agreement. Well, okay then, I'll stay at my post until the end of the shift, 2 more hours, and then go home for today. The boss replied and closed his office door behind Maxim. However, the small gap allowed Maxim to overhear something. I have an address. We need to visit it tonight. Yes, everything's as usual, following the old scheme. There will be a girl at home with a small box. Retrieve its contents and split it 50-50. It seemed that Evgeny Borisovich was talking to someone on the phone and was so engrossed in the conversation that Maxim was fortunate that he hesitated for a few seconds and didn't immediately go down to the customer area. He felt uneasy about what he had just heard. The security guard couldn't believe his ears. His boss had decided to rob Lisa, and it was all because of Maxim's unwitting compliance. He had unwittingly set up the girl, and in this situation, he needed to come up with something to leave work as soon as possible. Maxim went downstairs and spent an entire hour at his workstation. He contemplated his course of action, and when the right idea came to mind, he went back up to his boss's office. Did you forget something? Evgeny Borisovich asked. Yes, I suddenly got a stomachache, Maxim answered hesitantly. Maybe I should go home. That's strange. You were fine this morning, his boss expressed doubt. And what did you eat today? Everything was fresh, as usual. Any complaints? The security guard replied, holding his stomach just to be safe. Ah, yes, that girl offered me tea and waffles, but now it's clear. I fell for a freebie. Evgeny Borisovich laughed, naively assuming that his employee had been poisoned. All right, send Stas to me. I'll give him instructions. He'll replace you. Thank you, Maxim nodded and quickly left his office. In the customer area, he found his partner, explained the situation in a few words, and left the bank. He needed to stop by his own home to arm himself before heading to Lisa's apartment. Maxim didn't know how many people would be there or what they would do. It was possible that they planned to simply rob Lisa by breaking into her apartment and restraining her. But there could be other scenarios, and Maxim couldn't allow that to happen. Time was passing, evening was approaching, and Evgeny Borisovich's men could show up at Lisa's place any moment. He was almost home. Maxim took out his self-defense equipment from the closet. He didn't have any weapons, but even if he did, Maxim wouldn't use them. Besides makeshift tools, he intended to rely on his physical strength. Before joining the army, Maxim had been actively involved in sports and had built himself up quite well. Get out of the house, he hailed a taxi and gave the driver the necessary address. There was heavy traffic at that time, and they were moving at a snail's pace. Maxim was noticeably nervous because he was afraid of being late. He remembered everything Lisa had told him. He simply couldn't abandon her in such a situation. It didn't matter that she wasn't actually anyone to him. It was his kindness and sense of responsibility that drove him. So Maxim hurried to her aid. Now he just had to deal with Evgeny Borisovich's trusted men. He wouldn't rely on dubious individuals, and if he made any calls, he was completely sure they wouldn't betray him. Lost in thought, Maxim didn't notice when the taxi arrived at Lisa's house. After paying for the ride, he got out of the car and looked around. He didn't notice anything suspicious, but suddenly the thought occurred to him that he might be too late, and Evgeny Borisovich's men had already carried out their dark deed. However, his attention was drawn to a black SUV parked near the familiar entrance. The driver's side window was rolled down, and white smoke was billowing out of it. It seemed someone was indulging in a bad habit and not being vigilant. Maxim decided to seize this moment and stealthily approach the car from the inside. Melodic music was playing inside the vehicle, and the sporty-looking driver was not only smoking but also softly humming along. Smiling to himself, Maxim circled the car, keeping low to the ground, and then quietly slipped into the entrance. Choosing to forego the elevator, he walked up to the 7th floor. The hallway was quiet, just like the apartment itself. At least, no sounds could be heard from inside. A strange feeling arose that the criminals had already dealt with Lisa. Without much thought, Maxim rang the doorbell, hoping the burglars would open the door, allowing him to pretend to be a neighbor. After a few seconds, a creak was heard. Another man with a sporty build appeared behind the solid wooden door. It seemed like he was the driver's twin or someone who bore a strong resemblance. Maxim reacted quickly and delivered 2 powerful blows to him. He fell to the floor, barely able to scream and attract attention inside the apartment. It turned out to be his accomplice, and there was also a security guard who didn't hesitate and, at the last moment, managed to snatch Lisa from his clutches. However, when they tried to escape, Maxim was shot in the shoulder, and it was the same attacker he had struck at the entrance. Clutching his shoulder in excruciating pain, Maxim didn't let go of Lisa. A couple of minutes later, they were outside, and only then did they call the police. Several vehicles, including an ambulance, arrived at the scene. The gangsters were apprehended and taken into custody. Losing consciousness, managed to say to Lisa, who ordered these people to go after her. Addressing the officer, the girl named the mastermind behind this crime. 30 minutes later, Evgeny Borisovich was arrested. Apparently, he didn't expect things to turn out this way. The special forces even had to break down the door of his office to drag him out. In the end, the entire gang ended up behind bars pending further investigation. Maxim was taken to the hospital, where doctors assured him that his life was not in danger. The bullet had passed through without hitting any vital organs. However, Lisa refused medical assistance because she blamed the gangsters for Maxim's injury and believed she herself had suffered in this situation. Returning to the apartment, Lisa entered the bedroom and looked at the jewelry box sitting on the table. Her first thought was to get rid of this legacy from the past. After all, she had almost lost her life because of these precious items. At the same time, Lisa couldn't understand where her mother had suddenly acquired such wealth. They had been saving their whole lives, living in deprivation, and all this time the jewelry box with gold items had been right under their noses. A strange feeling overwhelmed Lisa. It seemed as if her mother intentionally concealed these valuables to avoid using them prematurely. But there was no logic in that because there had been times when they were desperately short of money, and her mother could have sold some of these items. Yet she hadn't done so, which only fueled Lisa's suspicions. She even considered the possibility that these jewels might be stolen. But then why wasn't her mother arrested? These thoughts swirled in Lisa's mind, but they didn't provide a clear answer. She had the impression that her mother's past was shrouded in a thick fog, and they lived under the same roof, yet Lisa couldn't fathom what skeletons were hidden in the closet. However, Her intuition told her that everything was happening according to a well-devised plan, and her mother was executing each step. But what was she striving for? If it was wealth, then she was going about it the wrong way, at least according to Lisa's opinion. At this point, all the pieces of this complex puzzle didn't fit together. Lisa took out the note from the jewelry box, which she hadn't had a chance to read yet. She unfolded the piece of paper, but instead of the expected text, she only saw an address and a phone number. Moreover, at the very end, her mother had written with her own hand, "You can always turn to them." Lisa didn't know what it meant, but it was likely that her mother left her a clue, and she needed to urgently find those who resided at the specified address. Lisa didn't call in advance. After all, she didn't know whose phone number it was, and there could be a surprise waiting for her that would take her a long time to recover from. No, Lisa didn't want to take any risks. She had already had a run-in with gangsters who had frightened her immensely and nearly cost her life. Armed with a map, Lisa set off on the following day. According to the given coordinates, the sought-after address was in a neighboring region. To save time on public transportation, she spent money on a private driver. Her neighbor had recommended a good company that didn't charge exorbitant fees. "Just tell them you're from me," the neighbor advised Lisa. "Mention the analysis. There's a guy named Arkasha, and he'll drive you there." "Thank you, Valentina. I don't know how to thank you enough for this," the girl replied, feeling embarrassed. "I don't need anything. The main thing is to find what's important to you." Valentina waved her hand. She didn't hide from Lisa that she intended to uncover the threads of her mother's past, and hoped to shed light on the family secrets in this way. Lisa spent several hours on the road. She stared at the passing buildings, trees, and bushes, memorizing the route so that she could find her way back home without any mistakes. Finally, they arrived at the desired location. It was a small town, but with elite houses. Everything around exuded perfection, and for a moment, Lisa felt like she had crossed a border. They then passed the city limits and entered a compact settlement that had all the comforts of civilization. Although it couldn't be said that it boasted majestic castles and palaces, there were nonetheless wealthy and beautifully adorned houses. The driver, Arkady, dropped Lisa off at one of those 3-story mansions. "We've arrived, if you provided me with the correct address," he said, turning to her. "Yes, that's right. Thank you for the ride," the girl nodded, thanking the driver for the comfortable journey. Waving him goodbye, Lisa approached the mansion. It evoked mixed feelings in her, as if she had stepped into a fairy tale, and nights were bound to appear for a moment. Any minute. She imagined herself as the queen of this mansion. Nevertheless, she still couldn't understand why her mother had given her this particular address. Judging by the ostentatious structure, wealthy people clearly lived there. Yet Lisa had no connection to them. At least her mother had never mentioned luxury and wealth, and they were not associated with Lisa's past in any way. She couldn't even recall any bright moments in their lives. Before Lisa could get closer to the mansion, a smiling woman in her 60s, dressed in a beautiful and expensive dress, approached her. She looked like the owner of a beauty salon called Blissful. The woman reached out her hand to greet her, saying, "Good day, dear girl. My name is Lady Vasilievna. I am the owner of this house. Welcome." "And I'm Lisa," the girl replied, "but I don't know you. I was simply given this address." "Well, it was mentioned in a note left by my mother, Maria Vlasova." Lisa handed the woman a small piece of paper from the jewelry box, looking at the writing. The woman's eyes widened, and from her expression, it seemed like she recognized the handwriting. Taking Lisa by the hand, she led her into the house, handing her a handkerchief to wipe away the tears that welled up. Inside the mansion, the girl saw opulent furnishings that she had only seen on television. There was an entire gallery of paintings, marble floors, and antique oak furniture. Lisa felt like she was dreaming, that all of this was unreal. The house's owner, Lydia Vasilievna, invited her to sit at a table, which was also made of expensive wood and adorned with exquisite artwork. All of this indicated that the owners were very wealthy and prosperous individuals. "Please have a seat. We have much to discuss," said Lydia Vasilievna, pointing to a handmade chair. At that moment, the homeowner, Sergei Nikolaevich, joined the conversation, introducing himself. "I'm Lisa Vlasova, and my mother is Maria Sergeyevna Vlasova," the girl repeated. "She left me this jewelry box and a note as an inheritance." Sergei Nikolaevich peered inside the jewelry box and looked at his wife with fear in his eyes. "These are the same treasures," he whispered, barely breathing. "Yes, they are," replied Lydia Vasilievna with a smile. "Will someone explain to me what is happening here?" Lisa couldn't hold back and said. Pouring fragrant tea and placing a dish of candies in front of Lisa, Lydia Vasilievna began her story. They had a business that brought in a substantial income, and Sergei and Lady Sergeyevna devoted themselves entirely to it, investing all their efforts and resources. Because of this, they couldn't devote enough time to raising their daughter. As a result, Maria started to shape her own future, and as soon as she grew a bit older, she met a guy. Naturally, her actions didn't align with her parents' plans, and they sternly advised her that it was too early to think about starting a family. Maria resisted their opinion and ran away from home. Perhaps it was her rebellious nature at that age. Many girls sought independence despite the lack of means and a promising future. She saw herself as a bride and refused to listen to anyone. Her parents tried to convince her otherwise, but it was all in vain. Maria distanced herself from them more and more until she completely severed all ties. That was the last straw that broke their patience. They simply accepted the fact that their daughter had rejected them and decided to come to terms with it to avoid tormenting themselves with guilt. "We wanted a better future for Masha," lamented Lydia Vasilievna. "But it turned out the opposite," Savid asked with a sad voice. "Not entirely," Lady Vasilievna shook her head. "With your permission, I will continue. Maria didn't have much money with her, so she took the jewelry box containing the family heirlooms. However, her parents didn't dare to pursue her and bring her back home. They decided to let their daughter decide how she wanted to live her life. It could be said that her father and mother let Maria go adrift. Maria ran away from home driven by emotions. She simply fell in love with Mikhail, who promised her a happy future, but for that, she needed to be as far away from her parents as possible. Maria believed him because her fiancé came from a poor family and had overcome many hardships in life. At that moment, she had no doubts that everything would work out for them. After giving up on pursuing her, Lydia Vasilievna and Sergei Nikolaevich calmed down. They realized that they couldn't stop their daughter, and there was no point in trying to convince her otherwise. Maria made her choice, thus sealing her own fate. Life with Mikhail showed that he had no intention of taking any action. He was content with having his bride by his side. Soon, Mikhail became
Maria
engrossed
endured
in
this
drinking
for a long
and started
time
coming
and
home
cried into her pillow at night,
frequently, hoping that Mikhail would change and they could start a new life together, but it never happened. Each day became worse than the last, as he increasingly turned to the bottle. One day, he almost drank up Maria's family treasures, but she noticed in time and hid the jewelry box. Their relationship finally fell apart. In the end, Mikhail left Maria when she was pregnant. During an ultrasound, Maria learned that she was expecting a girl. After her daughter was born, Maria exerted all her efforts to raise her without any assistance. It was challenging, but she never gave up. One day, in order to secure a happy future for Lisa, she rented a safe deposit box and placed the jewelry box inside. Time passed, and Maria never thought of using the treasure. She contemplated it, but each time she mentally said to herself, "No, it's for Lisa." Even when she fell seriously ill, she still couldn't bring herself to take even a part of the precious heirlooms. Maria's courage was admirable. Knowing that she had the opportunity to improve her health or at least prolong her inevitable end, she chose not to use them and remained silent until her last breath. She departed from this world, refusing the chance to live a little longer. On the other hand, the illness, as confirmed by the doctors, was incurable, and it's unlikely that anything would have helped. Unless a miracle occurred, but it never did. Ultimately, Lisa was left without a mother. In essence, Maria condemned herself to such an existence, and it was difficult to judge why she did so. Having worked as a cleaner her whole life, she never laid a hand on those precious heirlooms. Lisa was in shock when Lydia Vasilievna told her all of this. She took out a handkerchief and burst into loud tears. For a few minutes, the girl cried, but then suddenly calmed down and said, "It's difficult for me to talk about this, but it seems you acted wisely." Standing up from her chair, Lydia Vasilievna approached the window and rested her head against it, lost in thought. Sergei Nikolaevich also got up and went to his wife. He embraced her shoulders and whispered, "We are not to blame for what happened." "No, we are to blame for not giving her the opportunity to get married," objected Lydia Vasilievna. But he turned out to be an alcoholic, and no matter what happened, everything would have turned out differently if we had helped, his wife continued to insist. "That's not true. Their family would have fallen apart anyway." Sergei Nikolaevich tried to convince his wife. "Maybe you're right," Lydia Vasilievna finally agreed. "We wouldn't have been able to do anything. But now we have someone to pass on all our love and care to." They both looked at Lisa, and after a minute, they hugged her together. In that moment, all their sorrowful thoughts faded into the background. They had a granddaughter to whom they could give everything they couldn't give to their daughter. Lisa also hugged her grandmother and grandfather, unable to believe in such happiness. "Honestly, I didn't expect that my mother had prepared such an inheritance for me," she said when they sat down at the table for lunch. "She knew what she was doing," Lydia Vasilievna replied. "I'm still studying at the university, and then I want to work in my field," Lisa confidently said. "Well done. What do you think about the future?" Sergei Nikolaevich asked with a smile. "And do you have a young man in your life?" "Not yet, but there are a few prospects," Lisa replied, squinting her right eye. "Maybe you can introduce us," Sergei Nikolaevich suggested. "Oh, come on, we just found our granddaughter, and you already want to know everything," his patient wife scolded him without pressing further with questions. "Perhaps she will tell us everything herself," said Lisa. "So Lizenka, of course, grandmother, lively," she reported. "Especially since you already tried to do that once." The hint was very subtle, but they all understood. "Forgiven. We almost repeated our mistakes," Lydia Vasilievna replied, crossing her arms over her chest. From that day on, a new life began for Lisa without problems and worries. She no longer had to count money or scrape by with odd jobs. She spent several days at their house, trying to get used to the new way of life, but eventually realized that it was best to pursue her own goals. However, she didn't reject the support of her wealthy relatives, especially since her grandmother and grandfather were just starting to get used to her. They also asked Lisa to show them where Maria's grave was. When they arrived at the cemetery, Lydia and Sergei spent almost half an hour in front of the tombstone. The spouses stood silently, looking at the modest monument. In addition to the inscriptions, there was a photograph of their daughter, a weary woman, burdened with problems and sorrow. It was difficult to endure such a trial, and they had to fight the urge to break down and cry right there at the grave. The next day, Lisa returned to the city to start her search. She wanted to visit Maxim and find out how he was doing. The security guard was surprised when she appeared. "I thought you had forgotten about me," Maxim said after Lisa sat down on his bed. "Oh, why would you say that?" she replied with a smile. "I was just running errands and found my relatives. Can you imagine? Interesting." "And you didn't know anything before?" the guy asked with surprise. "No, my mom didn't tell me anything," Lisa shook her head. "I only realize now how secretive everything was in our family." "What about it?" That your mom deliberately kept the truth hidden, Lisa replied. It turns out we were living in poverty, but at the same time, we had the means to not need anything. So it's because of the jewelry box in the safe deposit box? Maxim asked, smiling. And not just that, Lisa waved her hand. She briefly told him how she had traveled to another region, not hiding the fact that she was deeply shocked, especially by the fact that her mother's parents didn't try to find their daughter. I understand they had their reasons, but logically, they couldn't just leave their own child in misery. Resentment crept into her voice. How strange, now both the grandparents and the deceased mother seemed that way, Maxim said, having listened to her story, offering his own perspective. In my life, something similar happened. I also ran away from home once and spent a few days in the forest. There was a hunter's cabin where I slept. I even cooked food over a campfire. It turned out my parents immediately knew where I was, but they didn't come to get me. They decided to give me the opportunity to test myself and see what I was made of. So you mean that the grandparents started it? Lisa began her question but didn't finish. Yes, exactly. It seems they also wanted to test your mom's resilience, Maxim concluded the logical chain. And that's their only fault. In everything else, we shouldn't hold any grudges against them. After all, you don't really know what was happening in their lives when their daughter ran away. Only in general terms, based on what they told me, the girl shook her head. Well then, that's why I advise you to accept everything as it is, Maxim suggested, summarizing the topic. Sorry, I completely forgot. The doctors say they will discharge you soon, but you still have to stay in bed for another week, Maxim replied cheerfully. I'll come visit you every day if you want, Lisa whispered softly and looked into his eyes intently. I really want to, agreed Maxim. Lisa took care of him, juggling her studies and visits to the hospital, as the injuries turned out to be painful. The doctors recommended that he stay in the hospital for a while longer. After some time, Maxim's parents arrived. They were shocked to learn that their son had been injured. Son, why did you choose this profession? It's tough, sighed his mother. I like it, replied Maxim shortly and succinctly. Dad, at least say that it was my choice. Lisa couldn't help but agree with her mother. You chose a risky job, his father shook his head. I thought you would go into engineering, he added. As if that's what was missing, Maxim reacted dissatisfied. You should consider being a security guard too, it pays well. Okay, son, sorry. Why did we jump on you like that? Elena Igorovna adjusted the pillow for her son and ran her hand through his hair. It was evident that she was deeply worried. How else? They almost lost their only son, even though he was already an independent adult living on his own. But he never stopped being their beloved child. Tell me, did you suffer for a just cause? His father asked, sighing heavily. But how can I say it? Maxim hesitated with his answer. It wasn't directly related to my duties. I don't understand. Weren't you protecting the bank's security? His mother intervened. No, I saved a girl's life, replied Maxim, shaking his head. And who is she? Leka Vitalievna asked. You'll find out soon. Lisa should be coming any minute now. Looking at the clock, Maxim suggested waiting a little longer, and indeed, 5 minutes later, the door to the ward opened, and Lisa appeared in the doorway. She was slightly flustered upon seeing unfamiliar people. I guess I'll come back another time, Lisa said. But Maxim shook his head and gestured to the chair. I want to introduce you to someone. This is my dad, Oleg Vitalievich, and this is my mom, Elena Igorovna. Nice to meet you. Maxim introduced his parents. And I'm Lisa, the girl replied. Well, son, excellent choice. His father raised his eyebrows. Come on, dear, don't pay attention to them, Lisa. You're a beautiful girl, and our Maxim is lucky to have you. Elena Igorovna waved her hand everything had already been decided for Lisa. On the other hand, she also felt a connection to Maxim. She liked him from the moment he escorted her home, but they didn't have a chance to get to know each other better. Maxim hurried back to work, and for some reason, he didn't ask for her phone number. After meeting Maxim's parents, there were no more doubts that they would become a couple. Lisa scheduled her visits during visiting hours so they could walk in the park located on the hospital grounds. There was a beautiful pond where they could feed the ducks. Maxim enjoyed tearing off small pieces of bread and tossing them to the birds. They gratefully swam over, flapping their wings, and took the treats. They were happy. Together, they had found each other, loving hearts. Lisa melted in Maxim's arms when he embraced her. She didn't want to think about anything else. All their troubles were behind them, and no one could harm them anymore. The jewelry box that her grandparents left her as an inheritance was not taken away. They decided that it was her rightful property. After some time, wealthy relatives came to check on the conditions in which Lisa lived. However, they ended up meeting her future fiancé. Maxim made a great impression. He was able to earn their trust. The grandparents were astonished after talking to a regular security guard. In their imagination, perhaps he should have been a different person, but it turned out otherwise. The young man had earned their trust, unlike the former fiancé of their deceased daughter. A week later, Maxim was discharged from the hospital. The doctors advised him to give up the dangerous job, but he couldn't do that because he had accepted the bank management's offer to become the head of security. Evgeny Borisovich and his gang were awaiting trial and could spend the next 10 years in prison. Moreover, no one would take back a convicted employee who had robbed bank customers, especially considering that someone nearly lost their life due to his orders. No, the path back was definitely closed to him. After his discharge, Maxim and Lisa continued to see each other. They couldn't imagine a day without each other, and it was reasonable to assume that it would lead to a wedding. However, the young couple didn't rush and wanted to test their feelings. Meanwhile, Lisa was completing her studies at the university and preparing for her thesis defense. Maxim tried to help her so she could have some leisure time. Soon, Lisa delighted everyone with her successful graduation from the university and obtaining a higher education degree. 6 months had passed since then. Lisa's grandparents informed her that they had written a will in which they named her as the sole heir. She wanted to dissuade them, but they didn't make any changes. "Understand, Lisa, this is our way of correcting past mistakes," her grandmother confessed. "But we've already cleared everything up," Lisa replied, looking at her with surprise. "Maybe so, but we will never forgive ourselves," Grandma continued. "That's why we decided to ask for forgiveness through you from Masha. We hope that our daughter will forgive us and not be angry. I think this inheritance should put an end to it, quite rightly," Lisa suggested. "Yes, you're right. Otherwise, we will never find peace," Grandma nodded, and they ended their arguments about the inheritance. "Remember the unfortunate fate of our daughter, Lydia Vasilyevna," Sergei Nikolaevich said. "We didn't want the same future for our granddaughter, so we watched over Lisa and Maxim to ensure everything went smoothly, without any pressure. And we secretly helped them financially. They even paid for the wedding themselves after Maxim proposed to her. He had already bought the engagement rings and invited Lisa to the restaurant. Music played as they entered. "I'm a little embarrassed," Maxim said, getting down on one knee. "Don't judge strictly how this turns out. I feel awkward too," Lisa admitted. "Will you marry me?" Finally, he spoke those words. "Yes," Lisa answered loudly. At that moment, Maxim's parents and wealthy relatives arrived at the restaurant. They clapped their hands and congratulated the young couple. As a gift, a famous pop singer appeared on stage. He took the microphone and started singing. Feeling the goosebumps? Let's go. To be honest, neither Lisa nor Maxim expected this. The marriage proposal turned out to be grandiose. A month later, they also celebrated their wedding in a grand and spectacular manner. It took place in the country house that Lisa's grandparents had given them. Initially, the young couple wanted to decline the gift, but their objections were not accepted. At the wedding, Grandma noticed that her granddaughter wasn't drinking alcohol and decided to ask the reason.
Lizaka,
I'm pregnant.
I understand
Lisa
that
answered with a
alcohol
smile
isn't
on
honey,
her face.
Grandma said.
Oh my,
But for your
what
happiness,
a wonderful gift.
you can have a sip.
With clasped hands, Lydia Vasilievna pressed them against her face and burst into tears. What's going on here? Maxim suddenly approached them. I'm partly crying, Grandma answered loudly. I'll have a great-granddaughter or great-grandson soon. Lisa, are you pregnant? Maxim asked. Yes, I took a test this morning and wanted to surprise you. Blushing, Lisa replied, today we have a double celebration. Maxim shouted at the top of his voice, announcing that his fiancée was pregnant. Immediately, all the guests congratulated him and wished them all the best. The parents also joined in the congratulations. Son, keep it up, Oleg Vitalievich said, kissing his cheek. I knew everything would work out for you, Elena Igorovna said through tears. The wedding became the beginning of their personal happiness, which they had long pursued. Maxim and Lisa found a strong family and the opportunity to become loving parents. Soon, through an ultrasound, they learned that they would have a son, an heir. After consulting with their families, they decided to name the boy Victor. As for the jewelry in the box, they kept them for future generations. After all, the family heirlooms allowed them to change many things, especially their perspective on life. Lisa and Maxim realized that nothing is more valuable than love, and they had no temptation to convert the precious items into money. Gradually, they furnished their home and prepared a spacious room for their son. His birth and upbringing in the near future became their top priority. Thank you for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, please support me with a thumbs up. All the best!